History is full of people dying. In fact, some might suspect it's all we do. But there are some deaths that are way worse than others. For example, death by the upright jerker. No, not that upright jerker, you trash, this thing. The upright jerker is a contraption that was meant to replace your traditional hanging. This was primarily due to the ineffectiveness of traditional hangings. You see, in typical hanging, sometimes the drop will be too much and the person will end up decapitated. Or conversely, the drop be too little and the person takes too long to die. So eventually they realize what doesn't go down must come up, and they just flip the whole thing upside down. Instead of having the victim drop to their death, they were instead flung into the air using a counterweight. If this seems like an even worse way to hang someone, that's because it was. If you were unfortunate enough to be executed by this method, your death would be long and painful, as it was for the case of James Stephens, a 19th century man accused of poisoning his wife. For this capital punishment, he was sentenced to jerking of the upright position. However, during his execution, for some reason, the rope was not severed in the usual way, with the blow of the hatchet. Instead, it was slowly run off from the post which held it. Because of this, he was raised gradually until his body was elevated about 4 feet from the ground. As a consequence, his neck was not dislocated, and death was instead produced by suffocation. For about 3 minutes after his suspension, he continued to struggle and contort in front of the onlookers. If this wasn't traumatic enough, they were also accompanied by the sounds of gurgling coming from his throat until his eventual demise. Drinking molten gold. This was potentially practiced more often than documented. It was practiced on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean by the Romans and the Spanish Inquisition. The technique is self-explanatory. The victim would be restrained and their mouth forced open as molten gold was poured down their gullet. This is exactly what happened in 1599 to a Spanish governor in early colonial Ecuador. Native Indians of the Javaro tribe were being taxed unfairly in their gold trades. Because of this, they attacked the settlement of Logroño and executed the gold-hungry governor by pouring molten gold down his throat. The result would be severe damage to the organs and blistering of the lungs. It was also speculated that gas would exit through both ends as molten gold and blood spew out. Within 10 seconds, the metal would congeal again and fill the hole you used to breathe out of. Of course, we are still talking about gold here, so the leftover remnants of the execution were kept and resmelted back into limited edition gold coins. I'm joking about that last part, but I doubt they wasted it. The Spanish Tickler. I promise I'm not joking with these names. This execution method is not as fun as it may seem. This terrible device was used in most of Europe during the Middle Ages. It's a very simple instrument that was used to tear a victim's skin apart. Due to its shape, neither bones nor muscles were spared. The victim was often naked and tied, making him or her completely defenseless. Then, the torturers began the sometimes public act of mutilating the victim. They often began with the limbs and slowly moved from the chest, back, neck, and finally to the face. Now this has got to be one of the most misleading names for any execution method ever. It just doesn't roll off the tongue like death by firing squad. But what it lacks in name, it makes up with in fear factor. My heart just goes out to the first person this was ever tried on. I sentence thee to death by Spanish Tickler. Well gee, that don't sound too bad. Where's the little guy hiding? Holy sh! The breaking wheel. Like the last one, this method served as a form of torture along with being an execution. The convicted would be taken to a public stage site to be tied to the floor. The wheel in question was a large wooden spoked wheel, typically the same one used on carriages. The wheel was used to mutilate the victim by dropping it onto their body. They usually started with breaking your shin bones and eventually made their way up to your arms. They even put sharp-edged wood under the joints, which worsened the entire experience. The body is then braided onto another wooden spoke, which is now possible due to you recently becoming a human noodle. After this, the executioner is now free to give you the old season finale. Now if you thought that was the end, ye have little faith in the cruelty of man. Sometimes they didn't even bother and just threw the whole medieval Autobot into a bunch of flames. Other times they were put onto spokes and hoisted in the air where they were scavenged on by birds as they decayed. Now there is still hope for you 19th century rapscallions. If there were any technical problems such as you falling from the wheel or the wheel breaking, it was seen as divine intervention and you were usually let free. Mock execution. Now this final death I save for last as it is the stuff of nightmares. In medieval Europe, there were many revolts and uprisings. One of them was led by György Doza of Transylvania. In the early 1500s, Doza led a peasants' rebellion against the nobility of the Kingdom of Hungary. He and his soldiers fought as well as a bunch of malnourished peasants could fight against an organized army. Eventually, Doza was captured and his execution was crafted to mock his ambitions. Doza was placed on a scalding hot iron throne and forced to wear a smoldering crown. He was then made to witness the execution of his own brother. There's more. While Doza was still alive, his body was subsequently used as sustenance for other prisoners of war. Yeah, good luck sleeping tonight. It is said that György Doza inspired many other peasant uprisings and even inspired